Delighted now to invite up two friends. We're going to hear from Rishad Tobaccowala of Publicis. We call him the Oracle. Let's see. Observations from the Oracle. Interviewed by another man that needs no introduction, Rob Norman. You know, Rishad is known for his prognostications and commentary on the marketing ecosystem, but from a broader perspective, because he takes into account a lot of things. And he's got a great new book, Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. I can't think of a more prescient title. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Terry. The normal sort of trivial overview of the market from LUMA Partners, which we're always grateful for. Scott Galloway apparently is going to call up for the breakup of the LUMAscape later on in his talk. I'm delighted to welcome at Rishad, as he's known to many of us. I'm at Rob Norman. And Rishad, never has there been a greater need to restore the soul of business. I think it's time you wrote a book on the topic. What's it about?
It basically is about how to think, see, and feel differently about growing your business, growing your team, but as importantly, growing yourself. Because my basic belief is none of us are going to fit in the future the way we currently think.
And you make a very big distinction, because we always talk about consumer marketing and consumer packaged goods, but this is the first time I think one of our own has made the shift from talking about the consumer to talking about the citizen, and that's pretty focal to your thesis.
Yes, I think our industry broadly, which is everybody in this room, including marketers, have lost the plot. As long as you optimize for the consumer, you're basically optimizing for one segment of what a person is, or one segment of what a human is. And one of the reasons why we have the issues we currently have is we only think about consumer benefit. From a consumer benefit, most of these technology companies are absolutely tremendous. From an impact on society and much broader strategic, they actually may not be so good. So the whole idea basically is to see a broader lens. So Lena Khan, for instance, is looking at stuff, how does it affect market structure? So there are many, many ways of looking at it, and we suggest to our clients that as our clients are basically thinking about not only business, optimizing, obviously, engagement and results. But if you go to them, they talk about purpose, they talk about values, they talk about environment, they talk about society, they talk about governance. How come none of that appears in the billions of dollars that they spend? And that really is why we have now today three big challenges. The first one is a breakdown in trust. And you know, it's very easy to say, nobody trusts the ad ecosystem and pathetic agencies like us. But the reality of it is nobody trusts anybody, including the Vatican and the University of Southern California, okay? So the reality of there's a massive breakdown in trust, a lot of that driven, by the way, through an ad ecosystem that works really very well in micro-targeting, but is a disaster from society perspective, which is number one. The second one is basically a complete dislike of the other and closed-mindedness. And you know, I basically say, look, if you don't like people that look different than you in the United States, kill everybody under 18 quickly. Because next year, the United States is Caucasian minority under 18. And I also remind people that all of us are immigrants. We're going into the future, which is the real borderline. And the last one is inequality, which is a huge issue. And so one of the big issues is if you think broader from companies, organizations, you're going to get somewhere. You think narrowly, you're going to get nowhere.
Well, I was with an Oxford professor last week, actually, called Rachel Botsman, who talked about trust, and she defined trust, which I thought interestingly, as having a confident relationship with the unknown. Do you think now that people have no confidence in the unknown and we're a fear-driven society, which is why there's no trust?
I think there is a decline in trust for a couple of big reasons. The first is uncertainty. This is to your point. Things are much more uncertain than they've ever been. And this is true, which is I spend a lot of time with very senior marketers and very senior other industry people. And after a couple of drinks, which is why I take them for beer, you begin to really realize the uncertainty. And they are uncertain not just about us. They're not just uncertain about their industry, but they're uncertain about themselves. right? And the key question is, are we relevant, and how do we remain relevant in transformative times? That's really one issue. The second one, to a great extent, is we have an absolute crisis in leadership in every industry, including ours, including our clients, and obviously government. The reality of it is blaming other people is not gonna be an option to succeed. We have a big issue in the United States and everywhere in the world. The reality of it is, if you are going to not have good health care, if you cannot get educated, and you do not have a societal trampoline, capitalism doesn't work, right? And these are things that we have to, I'm at the University of Chicago, and I'm very involved with the University of Chicago. I actually fund a student there every year from India, so I sit there a lot. And I can tell you the University of Chicago is building its entire case as to why the current system of capitalism doesn't work. And this is the system, this was the school that gave us Milton Friedman. Right? And so even the University of Chicago says, what the shit's going on? And that's what we have to do as leaders, which is like, stop blaming everybody and stop being all terrified, and let's go fix something.
Well, of course, Milton Friedman also in some ways sort of gave us, well, I was English at a time, you may remember, I don't know, but I'm American now. Milton Friedman, of course, gave us Margaret Thatcher. And Margaret Thatcher, when she talked about inequality, talked about it in a way that many people wouldn't find attractive. She said the trouble with socialism is that sooner or later you run out of other people's money. And so when you think about how capitalist systems need to adapt and break down, how do you counter that narrative? And I think we're going to hear an awful lot of that over the next 18 months or so about the willingness and capability of running out of other people's money.
I think capitalism is the best thing that has happened to probably society. The problem right now is it's under threat. Capitalism requires competition, which is number one, right? Capitalism basically requires the ability to both succeed and fail. And if you fail, there has to be a way to re-succeed. The way I sort of describe it is this. Right now, we have a tightrope. We're all asked to walk the tightrope, which is called capitalism. But if we fall, there is no trampoline. If we fall, there is no ladder of education to get back. And by the way, someone has played around with the tightrope because they have the data, they have other things. So even if you want to compete, you can't. That's the issue.
So I was trying to think beyond the sort of the normal Punch and Judy show of the Google and Facebook and Amazon conversation about social and economic impact on society. So I'm going to give you a list of companies/institutions, and they're in alphabetical order, to be clear. So there was no bias, conscious or other in this. And the question is this, Rishad. So it's rank the following platforms, and we'll don't strictly have to do that, in the order to which they pose a threat to social economic structures. And the order is Amazon, Facebook, Fox News, Google, MSNBC, and Walmart. So I'm curious to know that as you think about the citizen and you think about the future and you think about inequality, talk about the dynamics of those organizations. So it's old retail, it's new media and old media, it's all of that. Where does it all fit?
So of the 6, 4 of them have very positively impacted society, and we are much, much better off because of them. And those are basically Amazon.
News,
yeah, it's basically Amazon, Facebook, Walmart, and Google. Okay?
Right.
MSNBC and Fox News, whether they exist or do not exist, doesn't actually change the world at all. Of those 2, the worst one is Fox, and not because of their perspectives about left or right. It's because they're anti-science. And I hate everybody who's anti-science. Okay, they're anti-global, anti-immigrant, they're climate change, they're stupid. And which is basically a travesty, because Murdoch is an immigrant and believes in climate change, but money basically makes his mind go crazy.
I understood they believed in both sides of the science.
So they believe in, so those 2 are somewhat irrelevant to the world, excepting Fox heard stuff. Of the other 4, they are dramatically fantastic for the world. And we want to make sure that they and whatever companies that they give rise to work. With that being said, in the near term, the one that is doing currently the most damage is Facebook, right? But to a certain extent, unless they manage to become the WeChat of the United States, which is what their strategy is, I think we have seen peak Facebook, okay? to a great extent, and primarily because they're going to have a very hard time attracting talent, and they're only based on advertising, which is not the whole way to build an entire industry. Google and Amazon in the midterm are far more likely to be dramatically impactful, along with Microsoft, because they have a lot of data, they own the cloud, and they basically understand the future isn't only digital, it's across offline and online, which these three understand. Walmart is amazing because in effect, we now all want to basically, they look amazing. So can you imagine 10 years ago, we all were scared about Walmart. Now we say, thank God they're the underdog. So that's where we are.
So we heard from Terry, and we heard at Google last week, that we are looked to be heading towards the world, partly through regulation and partly through some of the choices powerful companies are making, that is going to switch the kind of data default of the population from on, corporations can use it, to off. It becomes an increasingly permissioned world. So do you see, and it's quite easy to articulate what the consumer gain is through an increased control of privacy, what do you think the loss to the consumer is going to be if the default becomes hard privacy settings?
So there are three parts of this. The first part is I do not like government determining outcomes, because whenever government determines outcomes, they always tend to be bad, okay? What I think government needs to do is uphold the laws, change the laws as necessary to ensure there's competition and transparency. The key is less privacy. Privacy obviously is extremely important, but the ability to control and monetize my own data. Because right now what we're all being doing is we're being strip mined by these companies, right? There is a massive cost by what's basically happening to us. So I'd love to have rules that basically allow us to increasingly leverage our own data, decide who to give it to and who not to give it to, and how to monetize. And to a great extent, before the government does that, I think the FTC needs to have some balls and start breaking up a few companies.
So do you think that there is evidence so far that citizens are actually actively seeking to control their own data, or have citizens inadequately identified the harm that is caused to them individually in order to be bothered with that?
Right now, I don't think people are as aware about what is going on. And there are a couple of reasons. The first is we have dumbed down society. And if you actually, I've always basically said, a country that watches so much of the Kardashians, something's got to be wrong with it, okay? So to a great extent, when you actually look at most stuff, it's really dumbass. So we're dumbing down society, which doesn't make sense. So therefore, people don't care. But they will care, and the reason they'll care is as it becomes more and more clear that where you live determines not only your education, but to a great extent, what mortgage rates you see. And in effect, algorithms, which are basically written by a bunch of white young men, okay, in Silicon Valley, are determining the future. Algorithms are basically, as someone basically said, is weapons of math destruction, okay? All it basically does is it takes your current bias and puts it into a machine. And those are things that we need to basically see. That's the stuff that we should be having debates and discussion about, right, versus whether global warming exists or not.
Do you think there's any hope in the kind of policy architecture of the world when you think about the leadership here and obviously the very ordered leadership in Britain, for example, at the moment, that you have much hope for any kind of governmental or regulatory environment that allows the right things to surface? Or do you follow the famous adage that politicians exist for one reason only, and that's to be elected, and they have no other purpose and function?
So I'm actually very optimistic about where we're going, and I'm much more in the Steven Pinker, Bill Gates approach to the world, which is I'd rather live in 2019 than live in 2010 or 2000 or 1950, okay? In the net sum, the world is getting better. Some things get worse. Some people obviously get worse off, but the world is getting better. I do believe that there are two groups of people I pay a lot of attention to. One is women, okay? Because I truly believe that women coming more into politics in a home with 2 daughters and a wife They bring a sensibility and wisdom that all of us don't have, which is number one. And then the second one is younger people. Whether you like what they say or not, I love, people like AOC, right? I love Mayor Pete. I love a lot of these people because they have different viewpoints. And so I am very optimistic about the future, right? As long as we old farts get out of the way.
That's what we're doing. That's our project.
That's our project.
At the moment. We are, and the reason why it says Publicis Group up there and Group M there, it's like a baseball tradition, is that you get retired wearing the shirt you last wore in combat. And so when I go and visit Rishad and try and explain to my children's children why I'm not in the Hall of Fame and should be next to him, I'll explain it through those terms. So we now have, as Terry mentioned, marketing services companies, one that you used to work for. Ours, the one I worked for, wasn't mentioned here, but IPG's Axiom, acquisition of Axiom, Dentsu's of Merkle, Publicis of Epsilon, seems to kind of be a desire of those companies to change their game. How do you suppose they will change the nature of those businesses?
So I know a little bit about each of them, much more about Axiom because they were also up for sale. I know a little bit about Epsilon. I think we have something to do with that.
Yes.
And what I would basically say is the first is, without a doubt, first-party data is going to be extremely important. And it's something that I think our clients are going to require to balance out what I think is a unfair balance of power. So I think most of us are going to hopefully, if we can execute correctly, become more relevant to our clients. Because increasingly you've seen with our stock price, the way we're sort of talked about, we're sort of given up for dead. So these are some ways we maybe come alive, which is a big thing that we're doing. A lot of it's going to be executional risk, and hopefully we'll all execute well.
So one of the sort of most famous jokes about people asking directions to get from somewhere to somewhere else is, I wouldn't start from here, but people are starting from where they're starting from. If you had the choice of cards to play right now, and you had Publicis' cards, or any of their peers, the immediate peers, or you had Accenture's cards to play, or you had S4 Capital, Sir Martin Sorrell's new enterprises cards to play, whose cards would you like to start with in the game of marketing services in the future?
Okay, I would like to start with the Publicis cards.
Well done.
Because we've basically spent $9 billion buying these cards, so we better now learn how to play with them.
Yes.
Okay? So I like our cards because, at least in our demented mind, strategically, we have to combine creativity and technology and data. We have to have marketing transformation, not just advertising, and digital business transformation. And with a combination of what we had originally, including the most powerful media companies in North America, buying I'm talking about, and the Digitas, Razorfish, LBI, with Sapient providing us digital business transformation, and when the Epsilon deal closes, it hasn't closed yet, providing us with data. I think we have a lot of the components, and therefore it's executional risk. With that being said, and we've had 5 years of reconfiguring ourselves. The strategy that we have done here was presented in December 2014 by Maurice and Jean-Michel, the CFO, and myself. So 5 years later, we're there. But more importantly, why I like our stuff is we've gone through the terrible, terrible stuff. It isn't finished yet, of rewiring our organization, changing incentive systems, moving people around, bringing in new talent, et cetera. That's really, really hard. The software part of this is much harder than the M&A and everything else part of it. So we've done that. So for us, it's executional risk. I like our chances. With that being said, if you look at our stock price, if you look at what we've basically done, we're pretty pathetic. So I think everybody else is good too. I think the ones that are likely to be well off are obviously companies like yours. The Accenture, Capgemini's, Deloitte's are all going to be players. I think S4, and I would never underestimate your old boss. Look what he's done and he's built. But S4, I think, is too small, too narrow, and too yesterday.
Too small, too narrow, and to...
The world isn't all about digital and data. It's about omnichannel relationship marketing, right? It's not this small shed. And the whole basic thing is I see him as a puppy trying to basically make the stock price of his main investment, WPP, go up.
Right. Well, you heard that here. There's a line from the early episodes of House of Cards, the British version at least, which goes...
But hey, these people are legends. They've built amazing stuff, so I should never underestimate them. But I'd much rather basically be Accenture Publicis than be S4.
You may choose to say that, but I couldn't possibly comment. So what's interesting about that is I had a question here, which you should have told me to take out before, because what I said was, is the essence of the marketing services company of the future driven by creativity, data science, or technology? And now I imagine you're going to say it's a redundant question because it's all of those.
It is all of those, and the big thing is, it's the most important stuff is marketing services is a growth industry, and all of us are basically have lost imagination and leadership and think it's a declining industry. My basic belief is it's a $1.6 trillion industry. If our industry was so horrible, why would Accenture, Capgemini, McKinsey, and S4 all want to come into it, right? So the reality of it's a growth industry, but we're trying to put together components that have normally not worked together, which are these key things. And each one of them are coming from a position of strength and adding some of these other capabilities. And I sense many of us will succeed, and many of us will have different models because there are different clients and different needs.
Well, people often ask me, because I'm quite short, to stand up. So I'm going to stand up just for a second, because I wanted to look at the clock, which we've not been able to see until now. And the big question is just for how long has it been at zero? Which we will...
I think that's what they're trying to show us.
Or maybe
but I think Terry took up time.
Yeah. Or maybe we're about to start.
Yes.
That could be... But I'm going to make the assumption...
that we are at zero.
Yes, the one thing we'll never be accused of is being men of few words. Right. Someone once said of me, the difference between you, Rob, and Bernie Madoff is that at least in theory, one day Bernie Madoff will finish his sentence. So I have to tell you all this, by the way. If those of you that have mobile devices of one description or other, if you go onto your Amazon app and you put in Rishad into your Amazon app, this is confidence, this is rishad@gmail.com. It's nice to have a name like Rishad sometimes. Put Rishad into your Amazon app, and that will take you to a pre-order page for Rishad's book. And finally, I'm reminded, I collect books, which I think you know. And there used to be, before the internet, a magazine called The Book Dealer. It was printed on onion skin paper in Charing Cross Road. And people used to rush there to get copies when it first came out, because it had books wanted and for sale, which has been slightly disrupted since the internet started. And my favorite ever ad in The Book Dealer, and a sort of a request to you to finish this today, is that someone advertise Margaret Thatcher, the Downing Street years, a fine copy in a fine dust wrapper, a rare unsigned copy. And I would hope you will at least keep for me a rare unsigned copy. Rishad Tobaccowala, a hero of mine. Thank you.